With us on the stage here, we also have Stefan Schönemann, who is the Undersecretary for Development Policy here at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it will be very much Stefan, who has also been working for many years at the country level as an ambassador in Ethiopia, I remember, and they've been in and very much, in your own hands and experience, have seen some of the challenges we have with deteriorating environments. You will be the one that carry the messages from our discussions or from the panel's discussions into the ministry and to the minister, Rasmus himself. I'm going to hope that we will have an interactive dialogue where I will invite the panelists also to react to each other. Be sharp, brief, and to the point. As many rounds we can get, the better. I will ask the audience here, make use of this opportunity to dive into your own curiosity and get the answers that you need from these, decision makers that are, how should we say, have tried it out on the private sector side, where the policies are the one that can take it forward in upgrading development strategies, etc. And then I would also invite you to take the floor as an audience. If you have questions, we have a mic here. Please come to the floor. And everybody out there across the globe, actually, that are listening into this event, do come forward with your questions on the Facebook, the WWF Facebook. Even the questions that we will not have an opportunity to answer in this room, you will get an answer later after the session has been closed. There will be people ready to comment on these questions. We will not go necessarily into the details of everything at this session, but now we're basically building, how we say, the stage from where we can further deepen our understanding on nature-based solutions. So, having said that, I should tell you also, I told someone this morning I was going to be here to facilitate a symposium around nature-based solution. And the person said, actually one working in the green startup, saying, the problem with environment is whenever you take part in environmental discussions, it's boring. But the thing is, this is not boring. This is actually the agenda of opportunity to resolve a lot of those complex challenges that we are facing in the years to come. So I will start off with you, Bo. You must be a very happy man.
Yes.
You have right now, you're part of a happy marriage, I should say, with Velux. You've done something like that with Carlsberg also. And you now have a toolbox on nature-based solutions. Is that what you need to move forward, or do you still see barriers in terms of what you can use this for?
Well, we'll be looking for this for many years to have the foundation to go forward. You can do easy math and say we will never have enough finance, and we will not have enough power to do this if we do not have the private sector with us, and if we do not have this foundation for change. I think what is important right now is that we make sure that this toolbox is actually out there working, because we are running out of time. You mentioned it, Tim, slightly, but we are really running out of time. So we can't afford 20 years like we did with the climate movement for this to happen. It needs to happen now. So we need to transform the toolboxes, the knowledge that we have, and then we need to start doing it very soon.
And if I move on actually to you, Tim, are you hopeful? You now have the toolbox. If you look at actions on the ground, how fast is it going?
I think in our field of work, optimism is mandatory. So yeah, I'm very hopeful. But recently, actually just in past weeks and months, even more so, because what we observe is that the private sector, local governments, and other actors are moving ahead, and sometimes ahead of the national governments. Of course, we would like to have strong national policies in place, and we need them. Without strong national policies, the private sector can and will not do much. But we see that the civil society, the private sector is moving ahead. And even through the COVID crisis, we did a survey of all the companies that considered these kinds of commitments. And 2/3 of them said, yes, we're still going ahead. 1/3 of them even said, yeah, we're still going ahead. We have made no savings to this commitment on climate change. So that makes me quite hopeful. And over the past few weeks, we have spoken with a number of private sector actors, new investment funds that are being put up by large financial players on forests, on agriculture, on nature-based solutions. So there's the emergence of a multi-billion-dollar restoration and conservation economy that we're seeing. And we have to be the ones to channel that in the right direction globally, collectively.
So you are a believer. You actually see a wave starting up now. You see from all sides of society an interest to actually make use of this understanding and insight that we finally have gotten. Bringing us to Velux. You are doing this. How does that fit into your business strategy? Not your philanthropic kind of thinking, I want to do good, but business-wise, is there a linkage?
I think, first of all, there's a very clear linkage with our DNA and our values. And I think that's important for any business, that if you want to act on climate change, you have to find the way that suits who you are, because that's where you have the most impact. And so I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. We are, of course, very convinced of what we're talking about here today, but for other businesses, there might be other ways of doing it. And we also, of course, respect that not every company is in the same privileged situation that we are, being foundation-owned, so it can be different. But apart from that, yes, of course, it also has a positive business impact. We haven't made any kind of return of investment calculations, because that is just fluffy numbers you can discuss. We've said we're going to spend in total on our whole strategy 1 billion Danish kroner. That's what we are ready to spend. And what comes back, how it comes back in terms of happy employees or better recruitment or customers who are more happy, innovation in our product development, creativity being unleashed. I don't know. We have not put any numbers on that because we don't think it makes sense. It's a question of, we want to do the right thing, and then for the planet, but for ourselves, it's a question of trust. And yeah.
It's very interesting because I think it's something that you hear more and more often from private sector actors. It's also an issue about being able to attract best talent into your company, that you actually have a clear position on wanting to make a difference, not only of socioeconomic issues, but also natural issues. Which brings us to you, Stefan. Classical development. This is not just about saving monkeys. There's something else to this. Why is that becoming relevant now? Why is that coming to the forefront at this stage, as you have seen it from working with development policy for many years?
No, sure. Thank you, Jan. And I'll dive into answering your question, but I just need to appreciate this event a little bit, if you allow me. We started out with an extraordinary good video with Bo and our minister. And when you see an upbeat video, you think, okay, what's going to happen here? Is that the high point? It was a good video, but then what happened was that we got so many good speakers on the floor, and I'm impressed by the knowledge and the insights that has been discussed today. So this is extraordinary. And why is that? Why is it relevant? Is there a wave coming? I do believe, and I think facts, as mentioned, are speaking their clear language. For us, and you heard our minister, this is certainly something that we need to absorb and take on board. And having said that, and before making it a wave, let's also remember that it's not new. Working on these issues has been part of our DNA for many years. You were kind enough to mention some of my earlier working places, so to speak. But I was 4 years in Nepal many years ago, and there we had a program called NAMSAP, which is a forest user group trying to to include super marginalized groups of society in a sustainable way of living and using the forest. In Ethiopia, where I was quite recently, they have a super ambitious plan to translate the agricultural sector into a machine in the economy, creating growth and so forth. It needed greening. We took part in that, creating much more sustainable solutions. So it's been there, but we need to do more. And how do we do that? We need to be systematic. We need to link up with our partners. Rasmus is on this agenda, part of a government with a clear ambition to step up green investments. And it's taking place. There's a strategy coming. Perhaps we can talk about that later. And the ambition is crystal clear. It's going to be even greener. So we have put more funding into key partners. Some are sitting here. We have partnerships with Bo and other very, very solid NGOs. So they are all part of the equation, but so is the private sector. And it's a super really, really inspiring story that we need to carry with us. But then again, there's been a lot of examples from the past. We are learning how do we do this more systematically? How do we scale it? I think you said, Tim, in your presentation, agendas are converging here. So working with this is also doing other things. Is also addressing other challenges. It's a concept, it's a tool that we need to bring in, and I think this is key. Stuart's presentation mentioned the Bonn projects, I think they're called, and had a figure of creating more than 300,000 jobs. And looking at development more broadly, jobs is key. So I think that's an interesting example. I spoke too long, but yeah.
No, extremely useful. The entire emphasis on working on greening development with a focus on exactly jobs and also as a counter to increased migration factors, etc. I mean, it all hangs together. The problem here now is time and scale, and barrier-wise. When we talk time and scale, what can we do? We have the framework. We know there are barriers. What can we do?
Yeah, so I'm guessing that this is a lot about how we think and how we go about projects like this. And that's why it's so interesting that there's a new strategy under development, because there we have the opportunity to set, you could say, the barriers, what would we like to support and invest in, and then all the different organizations and parties who have this knowledge, they know the framework, and we can bring ideas forward. I think one of the most important things that have happened the past few years is that earlier on there used to be this idea that there was a conflict between fighting poverty and saving nature. Now we've proven, we also have some projects which are funded by the Danish state. We have proven that these can go hand in hand and compete with other types of projects. There also used to be a conflict between short-term crises and long-term solutions that will prevent future crises. Now we know that we can create jobs by doing mangrove restoration, and then we will have more security on food and water and protection against floods and so on later on in the process. So I think all of these misconceptions, now we have proven that it doesn't need to be like that. You can do both. We will have a framework. And so I would like that we could have a committee or something, some body that could support this work, so that it will really be easy for those of us who are eager to get started to actually do it within the framework of all the other interests and political needs there may be.
Excellent. So you're specifically proposing that would be some kind of a platform or place or process or committee or whatever that would actually help accelerate that kind of thinking, advising what could be done in context of a new strategy. Is that
exactly? Because we've seen this working on climate and so on. Why not have a nature ambassador, for example, that has proven to work really well for climate? have a committee that can support, have an independent council that can advise. Let's do it now instead of talk about it in 10 years like we did in the climate situation. Then we will have fewer problems later on.
I noted the word nature ambassador. That's interesting. One of the challenges that, I worked for a number of years at the World Bank, and one of the issues was always coupling finance with ambition and actions. How do you do that? Looking at the private sector, that's one arena. Another arena is finding ways to put value on these externalities get it inside, how should we say, the government's machinery way of thinking. We have learned it takes time. So the question is to you, Ingrid. You have now given an example of how it can be done. You are part of the Science-Based Target Coalition, etc. Are you planning to actually go out and do even more championing your example on what you have done? You just told that you've been called by another company that have showed interest, but this needs to be advertised broadly, globally. How can we do that? What would be the way forward, you would think?
But that's where obviously I think the private sector is extremely important in tackling the challenge of climate change and biodiversity, because it is in our nature as companies to communicate and market what we do. And if you want scale and if you want to convince people, you also have to be strong and explaining in very simple terms what it is you're doing, and not least the why. And that's what I think private companies, that is in the essence of being a private company, is of course having a customer relations and being able to explain the value of whatever you bring forward. And so I think that private companies can sometimes maybe in maybe more simple terms, and maybe also to other audiences, that, you say ordinary people, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, come forward with the examples and explain the why, maybe in a more simple, sometimes also more compelling. And also, of course, if you have a strong brand, which is a trusted brand as a company, you already come with a legitimacy that people trust. So I'm very much a proponent of private sector stepping forward and being the voice. And of course, showing by example, and there can be different examples. Here we've got one, which we believe is the right way, and there can be other ways of going forward. So I'm really a proponent of that. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And UNEP, you're also working with finance. UNEP FI is also a body of your organization that actually works with investors and how to address also environmental issues. And I know that they're also working on some of these aspects as well. But I wanted to ask you another question, which is in terms of the barriers. You said there are movements. We are on a wave that is starting. You need leaderships. We heard that from one of the interventions. If you have local ownership and leadership on a burning platform, then you can actually get the action at the scale and level that we want. How do you see ways in which Denmark could do a difference in that context? What could Denmark do to actually help you push this agenda concretely?
So Denmark, despite its relatively small size, has been an outsized player, I think, in the past already on a number of issues, going back many years, on renewable energy, on water. So it's doable if you choose very specific and targeted interventions that are strategic and have a multiplier effect. And that's perhaps again why the role of the private sector is so critical. For the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we did a calculation of all the various cost estimates that are out there. What it really takes to restore ecosystems at a planetary scale by 2030, we came up with around about $1 trillion. So it's an amalgamation of different costs from different sources, but give or take a few billion. $1 trillion, it sounds like a lot, but between now and 2030, it's 0.1% of global domestic product. If we're not able or willing to invest that in our planetary home and in the basis of life, then maybe we don't really deserve to get out of this unscathed. So I think that kind of reinvestment, though, will not only be public money. It has to be a reprogramming of how the economy works. And therefore, it's fundamental that through bodies like the United Finance Initiative, we have about 230 members of all the pension funds and insurance companies and banks, that we trigger a shift in the way investments are made in the agri and food sector. Again, Denmark has some very large companies in the agri-food system. Denmark has some large players in the finance industry. That we shift and reprogram the way the economy works. And one other aspect that Denmark has already helped us do is to rewrite how a Minister of Finance actually knows if the country is doing well. Because right now, the Minister of Finance, most countries, they look at GDP, numbers of jobs, is a very limited number of indicators. And in the UN statistics, since a few years, you can actually now officially measure the environmental account as well. So what is your natural capital? Are you only doing well because you're drawing down on your forest resources, on your clean water? Is that why your GDP is going up? So that sounds like, you know, it's a boring statistician's job to measure, but it's actually very important for the way nations know if they're doing well. So it's a combination of different things where we need to push and pull, and some are better at pushing and pulling some levers. But as long as we coordinate and work together amongst the different players, governments, the UN, NGOs, private sector, I think there's a real momentum that is emerging.
So what you're basically saying is Denmark is doing already what it should. No, I'm just gonna provoke you a little bit by asking you if there would be an ask for Denmark, and on top of all the excellent things that are already happening, what would it be?
Well, Denmark, I think, is well known for the water and renewable energy sector. To add nature to that would, I think, be what would be ideal at this point, because it can contribute to a lot of these agendas that we talked on today, and to say, yes, you know, Denmark is making green investments now also priority of official development assistance would be great.
Yes, exactly. And at a point in time where we have climate change impacts deteriorating livelihoods locally, also in migrant producing areas, there's actually a lot of common interest in addressing these kind of issue in such a way. Well, the strategy itself, you haven't even started. It's coming, so it's too early to say anything actually really about the strategy. But I guess it is fair to say, Stephen, with this government and with Rasmus's kind of approach to greening development, it does provide an opportunity to bring, how should we say, balance between the three dimensions and in accordance with the SDGs that we actually never have seen before. Does that pose an opportunity, you think, in terms of also partnering with new partners in civil society or business or investors, etc.?
Thank you, Jan. But I think you said it, Tim, in 2 words: add nature. It's unfortunate that we are at that point where we need to remind ourselves to add nature. That's why we're sitting here. But having said that, of course, moving forward with a strategy, having a government with a crystal clear ambition to move on these agendas, this is going to change things. Exactly how is way too early, as you say. But I think with the standards, with the experience on the table, with Tim being kind enough to remind us that we do have a critical mass of knowledge also here, I think it is going to change. It's going to be visible. But I think another key word is partnerships. I think the current strategy is already based on partnerships. It's going to be even more so, because it's crystal clear on this and on many other agendas that development assistance will not do the trick alone. We need to work in partnerships with private sector, with NGOs and so forth. And I think our approach on this is going to be similar as on a number of other issues, that we'll continue to support key players like yourself, Tim, IOCN, so forth. Work within UN system, other places where the big agenda is set, where overall direction is established. Now we have standards. And then we're moving down to the field and trying to create the good examples, again, with partners, and hopefully allow that to inspire. We're going to see that. And this is what Rasmus is talking about when he's talking about the little green wheel or the little green gear moving a bigger system. Yeah.
Excellent, perfect. And among those partners, looking you, Ingrid, and then I'm just going to inspire the audience to think about a question to come up with while I talk to Ingrid. It also goes for you in the virtual space. Be ready. Ingrid, isn't it all, I mean, seen from the outside, as kind of it's a dilemma. Everybody talks about, the private sector. We can't do nothing without the private sector. We need private partners to address these issues. But the private sector is not at the table. And there are all kinds of suggestions. Should we reform the UN system, the governance system, bring them to the table, be part of the debate, part of the solutions? We are out there, we are in contact with society, etc. If there is a process around engaging you and building on your example, at what stage would you see you as a company being able to take part in that kind of dialogue? Is it as part of a committee like what Bo is suggesting? Would you be, as a private sector, would you see yourself being able to go into that kind of sounding board for a ministry that wants to develop a new development strategy, in theory, in principle?
Most definitely, we would like to share experiences and also maybe open maybe the eyes of what is important for a private company. And that's why I think it's extremely important following the partnership approach, because in the past year that we've been sitting together with WWF, I don't think that any of us would have arrived at where we are if we hadn't been together. So that goes without saying. We've both become more clever and have co-created in the process. And with regards to the UN negotiations and the COPs and all that, I've attended quite a few myself, but I've always had to, first of all, struggle to get a badge, as I'm sure some of you have tried. And then there's like, okay, Danish Confederation of Industries, they have 7. Okay, can we have 1? And then you find, of course, you're in the tent outside and trying to do some side events and all that. And of course, I know there's very good reasons for that, and not least that the private sector is not one sector. There's also some quite different, very, very strong private interests who are definitely not in favor of the discussions that we have here. So I respect that. But I've sometimes felt like, okay, we're very much on the outside. Can't we please come in and show some examples and some solutions? And then if I just may add, what I think is also important for private companies when you enter into partnerships like this is, of course, that whatever climate change action, nature action you take, that you can be certain that you preserve the trust that you have spent maybe decades on building with your customers. Because that's what it's all about. If you lose the trust as a company, whether it is towards consumers or other businesses, then it takes years to build up, and you can lose very, very fast. So I think companies would be looking for climate and nature action where, of course, you maximize impact, like we see here, but also where you minimize risk. And that's why I think the nature-based solution approach is extremely interesting and relevant, because, of course, for a company, you cannot do good in one area, say now we're doing something for the climate, but if at the same time you have creating troubles for the local communities or hindering development biodiversity, etc., of course, in the end, it's a question of you lose your trust. So I think it's both the maximizing impact and the minimizing risk that is important for the private sector, and that's why we find this holistic approach extremely compelling.
Excellent, thank you. Can I then ask the audience if there's any questions? Please come to the microphone, and Trine, also be ready if we have hundreds of questions in the cyberspace. Please go ahead. Please tell me who you are or where you come from.
Jakob Kroning, Director of International Department Department of Forest of the World. Thank you very much for this hugely inspiring event, and most of all, congratulations to Velux and WWF. I really think you've nailed it in terms of both dealing with the very difficult climate debt discussion, saying no to offsets, which I think is very brave, and also dealing with or promising drastic reductions in your future emissions. And maybe I would like you to reflect a little bit later on setting the bar so high. Do you think it's possible for the majority of companies to follow and to actually do something? I hope they will. And then I'd like to turn also to Stefan, to a similar example of what I think has been one of the biggest Danish climate investments in history, where Denmark has supported countries in Latin America mainly, but like Bolivia, Peru, Nicaragua, in safeguarding huge forest areas with rights, territorial rights. And as Velux and WWF, they are fulfilling what IPCC and IPBES, the IPBES, the Biodiversity Ecosystem Panel, are saying is that if you want to, you need to do something fast with biodiversity and climate. The only thing you can really do very fast is protecting huge carbon-rich ecosystems like peatlands, but also tropical forests. What IPBES is also saying in their global assessment report using IUCN data is the most efficient way of doing it is through indigenous people's rights regimes. They cannot do it alone, they need support. And Denmark did that support during 10 years and have assisted in these 20 million hectares, which many of them are still there, but are under high pressure. So my question to Stefan is also to reflect a little bit on the huge forest fires, which we see also this year, achieved a lot of attention last year, but what can Denmark do, and what will Denmark do in this new strategy with relation to safeguarding indigenous people's rights? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. No, I don't think all companies will be able to do the same. I think that can be difficult depending on what sector you're in. And I think there's several things that each company would have to consider. There's something around the ownership structure. Of course, in the end, there are owners as a board, but behind the board there are owners. And if the owners don't agree, then of course, and if they want the profit of the company paid out instead of going to 20-year-long partnership, then of course that's how it is. But that's maybe back to my previous point with I don't think that you can make a return of investment calculation on partnerships like this, and I don't think you should. But of course there might be some owners who would not accept that. Then of course there's also, depending on which industry you're in, if you're very high energy intensive, there's definitely, of course, if you've been dealing with a lot of raw materials, then of course you have emitted a lot more CO2, and at the same time if you have very low margins, then of course it can be so costly that you just simply can't do it. So of course it takes some, it will be different from company to company. But what we're saying is not that every company should do the same, but just trying to inspire and make other companies reflect on what has happened in the past. So what is the footprint that you have left? And here we're talking about the carbon footprint, but it could maybe also be, I don't know, chemicals emitted or plastics, or it could be also within other areas. So trying to say it's not good enough just to draw a line in the sand and say from now on we will behave really well. Because we all know that after 2050 we have to become carbon negative, and for that we have to capture carbon from the atmosphere. So someone has to step forward and do something more.
Yes, yeah. And enabling a race to the top for those who can is quite okay. We shouldn't stop for that reason.
No, that's the leading by example, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Stefan?
Thank you, and thank you, Jakob, for an excellent question. You are asking what Denmark can do, and of course, then we are moving into what you know well is ultimate decisions made not by me, but our political masters and so forth. But I think the message from Rasmus is clear, and somehow I hope that I have indicated that I will certainly carry a message with me back on the issue of nature-based solutions. Specifically, you're referring to our previous engagement in forest in Latin America. And again, without making this a boring session on how development assistance develops, you also know, and many of you know, that this is something that develops over time. Priorities do change and so forth. But on the question whether indigenous people and forest is important to us, I need to say yes. You know, because we're supporting you. Bo knows. Yeah. I think our good friends in Ugia knows well also. So could we do more? Yes, and that's the case for a number of agendas. But as I said, let's bring it on board in the process, in the dialogue that we are going to have on moving forward with the government that are dedicated on this, and let's see what happens. Yeah.
Excellent, Stefan. Excellent. Trine, do you have a question? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Jarl. This is a question from Helene Gjerding, who is from the Danish umbrella network called 92 Group, and she's asking if any of the panelists can comment on the need for legislation, be it national or international or EU. Would it help, and what kind of legislation would be helpful? Thanks.
That's a small question. Okay, regulation-wise, we are in a decisive decade. Could we just get one of the panelists to maybe address what the opportunities are? Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm just saying, I'm thinking EU Green Deal. I don't know.
Yeah, could be a good idea, but we're in a hurry. I think I made that clear. Legislation does not work in a hurry. So let's just do the, I was almost swearing there thing and get it done, right? So we all have the same intentions. We now have the frameworks. Let's get it done. And a very brief comment on Jacob's question. You can't do conservation or do anything like this if it's not on the terms of the local people. So land and nature is a commodity, and there's a lot of people, and there's not much land left. So all these solutions have to be in concordance with the people who live locally. It cannot work any other way. We've tried that in the 80s and the 70s. It does not work. And I can say, Ingrid also knows this, that the projects that Velux are conducting with us are made in exactly the same manner. So that's simply how it must be done.
But there is an issue there, I think, if I may just add, because if you look at the country like Denmark, where we have had all kinds of protected areas, Nature 2000, Paragraph 3, or Wildlife Reserve, etc., no matter what we've called protected areas in Denmark, biodiversity is crashing. We have not come up with one piece of legislation that has actually had a positive impact on biodiversity. The same goes for most of the European countries. So there is a regulatory kind of an issue that we haven't understood. Maybe something that has to do with the fact that we don't know how to price these kind of externalities. So that being said, I think we move on to a question here in the room. We're going to close. Actually, we're running over time, and we are quite aware of it, so we're going to close very soon. But just I see two questions here in the room, and maybe we'll take one more from you, Trine. And make it brief and short, please.
Yeah, Esben Brandi, Future Force Company. I work with pension funds and investment managers developing sustainable and climate-oriented investment opportunities. My question is to the entire panel, and I don't think everybody needs to answer, but from the global south, you now hear quite a lot of criticism for nature-based solutions as a second wave of colonization, not providing proper jobs, no taxes, no pensions, no real opportunity for Global South to actually develop their economies, their industries into something we have here. And I wanted to hear how you think and how you reflect on that in relation to nature-based solutions.
It's the old conditionality question. Who will, you want to take, Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Aspen, for that that question. Just a quick word on the regulation. If I could make one wish for a piece of regulation, it would be on food imports into the EU and what footprint Denmark and other EU countries have. I had a meeting on this with the Ministry of Environment this morning, who are thinking what kind of role Denmark can play. So let's not forget Denmark also has a role to play within the EU, not only on foreign affairs and development assistance. On the question of the nature-based excuses, if I may call it that, because those are not nature-based solutions. You saw the definition, they have to contribute to human well-being. So anybody who has or designs something that deprives people of their fair share of benefits, that is not a nature-based solution. And we have decades of experience of how to do it right. This is not a new concept. This is just it is a more powerful brand. So we've turbocharged the brand, but the knowledge comes from decade of testing and trying, FPIC, free prior and informed consent, INRAD plus, verification of the carbon measurements. We know how to do this. Maybe not at the scale that we're talking about now, and there is a risk, so let's not downplay that, but maybe it is also time for us to say, and here, you know, all my respect to WWF and other NGOs, but if we want to get this right, we have to see big nature investments on the scale of other big infrastructure investments. If you plan a new port or a 4-lane highway anywhere, there's dozens of engineers, there's hundreds of studies being done. You know, these are definitely not nature-based solutions, and I wouldn't always agree with them, but they do that stuff right because the money is there to do it right. And this is the same with nature-based solutions. It has to be done right. It has to be done with the right kind of consultation, planning, different kinds of expertise you need on the ground, and it is time to pay the proper price for doing what such projects cost.
Just a small point to Tim's very solid reply there. But let me just say, that's not going to work. I mean, at least not when we have, this is not how development aid is supposed to work. So besides the very clear answer there, of course we need to be careful and mindful if this is coming. But listen, ownership is key when you work in different partnerships and so forth. And we're going to continue to insist on that. But then I think it comes back to the issue of converging agendas here. This is not, and you're saying it, this is not a standalone thing. This is going to interlink with many other things, and there we'll need to secure sustainable development impact, of course. But there is a risk, I guess. We're all saying we need to move fast. There's no time for legislation. There are just go, go, go. Of course we need to be careful here, not to slip and be blind for all the many dynamics that's always involved in fast moving and upscaling.
Yeah, it requires perhaps a new scale or level of agility of doing development differently, as we know when the ministry is also discussing a lot on how to do that. Tim, but we have a very, very brief question, because then we have a question coming from the floor.
Everything you do must have some kind of funding. Most of the nature-based solutions we've seen so far has been funded by organizations or foundations who have conservation at the heart, and not necessarily the whole society as a part. That's why it's so interesting what Ingrid says. We see this as risk management. I see this as an opportunity, but we have a shared interest, because then you make sure you see this. The same goes with development aid. You have political aspects, you have partnership aspects, and so on. So The judgment of the projects we've seen so far, you have to see it through the lens of how they were created. I think what we're discussing here today is in another size and will be better suited to make sure that all interests are met.
Excellent. Do you have a question? Brief.
I do. I'm going to try to be brief. My name is Leslie Snyder, and I'm the director of the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Collaborative. We're hosted by Save the Children here in Denmark. And I know this may sound a bit unusual, but we actually have a climate change mental health researcher working with us from Johns Hopkins University. And I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot today, but we're studying the interface of mental health and psychosocial well-being among conflict-affected children and families and youth, and that bi-directional relationship. And I heard words here that really resonated with me, which was safeguarding nature, safeguarding societies. Well, this is what we're into, the safeguarding of children business and safeguarding of youth. And I also, several years ago, had the privilege to hear Kevin Bales speak about his book, Blood and Earth, I believe it's called, on human slavery and the interface with ecocide. And all of these things really resonate with me. I realize I'm speaking with more of development people here on the panel, but do you see the interface with the humanitarian world? And of course, what we have is the root causes of conflict, forced displacement, and migration, and also the effects of migration. Refugees, when they cross borders, when they land in camps, also have a huge footprint. So I'm wondering if you see that interface, and if you also see the possibility in terms of this building back better, a way that we can get the youth that we engage with around this issue involved with green jobs, because they have fabulous ideas. And I'll refer you to our website and our video where we interviewed youth from Southern and Eastern Africa, sort of to look at the ideas they came up with. But do you see the interface? I'm just finding it myself, but I'd love to hear from you.
It's a great question. Who would like to take that one?
I can make a brief comment. Yes, there's a very big interface, and that's why I mentioned earlier that these solutions can create jobs just like any other solution. Every 2 years or so, Danita evaluates the partners, how they're doing, and these green solutions, We Do Them Care and others, they perform pretty well, so they can be interlinked. And then you have to remember also the long-term perspective. If we do not do this, we will have more problems of that kind. So this is both a short-term and a long-term solution, perhaps also supporting humanitarian needs.
We're very involved with something called the Great Green Wall Initiative, which is building more resilience across the Sahel. And it started as a forest and landscape restoration initiative in 2007, but it has really evolved now to be more of a focus how to use land management to ensure equal rights and access, to ensure health and prosperity. So restoration of ecosystems has morphed more into a humanitarian and peace agenda there. It's quite an interesting project to study, a huge project. And so your question is super important. For the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we did about 100 youth consultations that were all self-organized. So all these different events happened by youth who got together and brainstormed what they could do with this UN Decade as ecopreneurs. So we didn't even have to organize it. So there's so much enthusiasm out there, and they sent us a report. This is what we want. Here's how we want to get this done. So absolutely, you're right. There's so much enthusiasm and potential out there. Thanks for raising that.
Okay. And very brief, Stefan.
I'll do super brief, yeah. Just to underline, when nature collapses and people are displaced, you're often faced with a humanitarian disaster that you need to address immediately. But the solution to improve the situation and to create stronger resilience is a development challenge. but the things are interconnected, and we see it as that, certainly.
I'm noting nobody's leaving the room, and we're way over time, so we're just going to do one question from you, Trine, from the cyberspace, and then we're going to round up and close.
Yeah, thank you, Jarl. This is another question from Myanmar, and it's more of a development question, I guess. It goes to any of the panelists, but what do you see? What's the importance of least developed countries like Myanmar or Uganda, we've talked about earlier, for them to actually take action on the nature-based solutions, for them to prioritize it? And how do you see countries like those being supported in doing so? I think we've heard from WWF and WWF in supporting it, so maybe Stefan and Tim, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, I can take it. I'm sure Denmark and the ministry also has a lot to say on that. The role is, of course, one where we have countries with very little investment opportunities domestically and a very low responsibility for the for the carbon footprint. Low emissions, so there's not much for them in their nationally determined contributions under the Climate Convention to invest themselves. But what they can do is to create the enabling conditions for the kind of investments for these projects we've heard, or ODA, to flow and be effective on the ground. And Uganda is doing that a lot. 2 days ago, I looked at the NDC for Rwanda. There's a number of countries across Africa that have made nature-based solutions a big part of their climate response, and interestingly, often from an adaptation perspective. So what those countries can do is ensure there's the right, good rule of law, good governance, the right enabling conditions for these investments to flow. That is, I think, the biggest contribution they can make.
Just to add, I mean, the question is a strong case for long-term development assistance, because it's in that relation that we, at least as a government, establish a deeper understanding and a good relation with a partner country, and can work on many of the issues that Tim is rightly pointing to. But we need to realize what you're saying, that resources or capacity to do this is, of course, not always high, and we all have a task here to build up. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. We could have continued for a long time. Oh, there's one more question coming from Trine.
Sorry, just a follow-up. I think we should give a little bit of extra room for our colleagues not being here today. This is a question for Ingrid from WWF, but it relates to the question we've just heard, which is, how come you chose to focus on the global south rather than investing in Denmark or taking action in Denmark? So I just thought that's a good question to follow on.
Yeah, so of course we discussed that also during the many months that we've been sitting together. Without being an expert, I know that of course there are also biodiversity challenges in Denmark. The reason for choosing on the global south was the effectiveness of the carbon capture projects in the global south and the very positive effect on biodiversity. And then also, just from a purely internal point of view, we also have our foundation, which is very involved with the Danish Nature Found, etc., already very active. So we have an arm's length principle, which is part of the Danish legislation, where you have a foundation that you can't overlap. So that was also a very, very internal reason for that. But we based ourselves on the expertise and our good partners from WWF, and that's back to the whole partnership approach.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll leave that being the last word, which is actually resonating extremely well. Keywords, partnership, but also one's risk, another's opportunity, you told us. I think we can sum it up in the general recognition that natural-based solutions is definitely a tool that needs to be integrated in how we do development. So good development perhaps is one that is also more green as compared to what we've seen before. We've heard very specific proposals on what Denmark could do more. Should it be a committee or platform or process that could help create a debate around these issues that could inspire some of the discussions around the strategy? a nature ambassador came up. I thought that was an interesting idea. If we know that we are dealing with planetary boundaries, and we do have on climate, should we have one on biodiversity and nature, perhaps? And what we also, I think, is learning. Leadership comes everywhere, from businesses that sees not only own interest, but also a more altruistic approach to what we just need to do. We see, I think, from global experience, where we do succeed at scale is where we have local ownership, local leadership. If you have that in place, you are very far. So that underscores what we also discussed, the need to talk and work with the communities, political leaders, and I think there's a big issue. We didn't delve too much into that, but there's an issue around competence. Competence in government, competence in businesses to understand what we are talking about is a key issue that need to be delved into. But as Stuart also said, the nature-based solutions is not a fixed and done toolbox. It's a framework that now needs to be given content and value and much more specific tools as we move forward. So a process has been started. The tent is open, and it's for our own curiosity to bring scale and speed forward as we walk away from this room in whatever role we have. We do have a responsibility to act. Having said that, thank you for your patience in every way, and have a great weekend. Thank you. Let's applaud our panelists.